Listen. Before you scroll another inch, I need you to sit all the way down, because what I am about to walk you through is not a rumor, it is not a whisper, it is not some cousin of a cousin foolishness somebody made up on a burner account at 3 in the morning. This is the receipt drop that is about to blow the entire Stefon Diggs situation into 1,000 pieces, and if you have been sleeping on Chris Blake Griffith, you are about to wake up in the middle of the biggest celebrity crash out of the year. I am talking phone records. I am talking hotel bookings. I am talking flight confirmations. I am talking timestamps that line up like dominoes waiting for one push. And when that push comes, it is not just Stefon Diggs standing in front of that judge. It is Cardi B. It is Stefon Diggs's entire inner circle. And it is every single blog, every single podcast host, every single loudmouth commentator who told you Chris Blake Griffith was lying. Because tonight, in the middle of the quietest hour of the night, TMZ dropped a headline that is about to end careers, end friendships, end brand deals, and quite possibly end freedoms. So pour something, silence your phone, and lean in, because I am about to break this all the way down, receipt by receipt, and I promise you by the time we get to the end, you are going to understand exactly why Stefon Diggs has not slept a full night since Discovery started. Now let me set the table before I start serving the plates. For anyone just tuning in, Chris Blake Griffith is the celebrity stylist who filed a civil suit against Stefon Diggs alleging that he was drugged, sexually assaulted, and then, a week later, ambushed inside his own apartment building by a coordinated crew of men who allegedly answered to one person and one person only. That person, according to Chris, is Stefon Diggs. For months the response from the Diggs camp has been the same tired playbook. He is lying. He is broke. He is looking for a check. He is chasing clout. That was the narrative. That was the wall they built. And for a minute it worked, because Stefon Diggs is a multimillionaire NFL star with a machine behind him, and Chris Blake Griffith was a working stylist standing on the outside of that machine with a busted face and a story nobody wanted to believe. But here is the part one need you to sit with, because it is the whole point of tonight's episode. A story only stays a story until the paperwork shows up. And the paperwork just showed up. Rewind about 72 hours. Chris Blake Griffith sat down with TMZ wearing a baby blue shirt that half the internet decided to have a whole opinion about. And in that interview, the reporter asked him point blank, "Do you believe Stefon Diggs set this whole thing up?" And Chris said something that at the time sounded like a hedge. He said, and I want to quote this carefully, "That is my belief." That was it. That was the ceiling of what he was willing to say on camera. And I remember watching that clip and thinking to myself, a belief and a bus fare will get you to court, but a belief will not win you a trial. You need proof. You need documents. You need the kind of evidence that makes a defense attorney's shoulders drop the second they open the folder. And Chris seemed to know that. He kept saying, "I can neither confirm nor deny, I can neither confirm nor deny, I can neither confirm nor deny." But I want you to watch that interview again with fresh eyes, because there is a moment, right before he says it, where the corner of his mouth lifts just a little bit. Not a smile. Not a smirk. Something quieter than that. Something closer to the look a chess player gives you when they already see the checkmate 3 moves ahead and they are just waiting for you to move your piece. That look was not accidental. That look was a man who already knew what his lawyers were about to find. And now, tonight, we know what they found. And what they found is not a hint. It is not a suggestion. It is not a breadcrumb. It is a full paper trail with signatures on it, and every single page of that trail leads back to one address. So sit tight, because I am about to walk you through the receipts one by one, and by the time we are done, you are going to understand exactly why Stefon Diggs's phone has been silent for the last 36 hours. At 2 in the morning Eastern Time, TMZ published a follow-up article with a headline that is going to age like a monument. Stefon Diggs's male accuser has obtained his text messages, and he plans to enter them as evidence. Read that again slow. He has obtained the text messages. Through Discovery. Handed over. On the record. Filed with the court. This is not a leak. This is not a screenshot from somebody's cousin. This is court-authenticated correspondence turned over under legal compulsion, and Chris Blake Griffith's team has spent weeks combing through every line of it. According to the filing, Chris now plans to amend his complaint to add new allegations built directly on top of what those messages reveal. And what they reveal, family, is coordination. Not suspicion. Not a hunch. Coordination. Here is what Chris is alleging in the amended complaint. He says the text messages and phone records he obtained show communications between Stefon Diggs's personal assistant and at least one of the men who allegedly stormed his apartment building. He says the correspondence includes logistical planning, flight bookings, hotel arrangements. The kind of granular, boring, day-to-day event coordination that only exists when somebody, somewhere, has organized something and needed to keep track of the moving pieces. And it gets more specific than that. Chris alleges that the phone logs show a call was placed to that same assailant, from Stefon Diggs's number, during the attack itself. During. Not before. Not after. During. While Chris was being kicked in the elevator. While his face was being stomped into the tile. While he was fighting for his life in the hallway of a building he paid rent to live in. Stop and let that land, because I need you to feel the weight of it. A phone call. Placed from the number of the man being sued. To the number of the man doing the assaulting. In the exact minute the assault was happening. That is not a coincidence. That is not a wrong number. That is not a but dial. That is a fingerprint on a crime scene, and the fingerprint has a name attached to it in 10-point type on a wireless carrier billing statement. If those records exist, and if they are what Chris says they are, then Stefon Diggs is not looking at a civil settlement. He is looking at criminal exposure. He is looking at conspiracy charges. He is looking at aiding and abetting. He is looking at the kind of paperwork that turns Sunday afternoon touchdowns into visitation days. And there is a second layer to this that I want you to understand, because the entire internet is about to miss it. Chris's team is not just relying on the phone records. They are pairing those records with the surveillance footage from the apartment building. That footage, which Chris has already posted publicly on his Instagram, shows one of the alleged attackers standing in the lobby holding a phone up to his ear right before the assault begins. The timestamp of that footage lines up. And when a jury sees a video of a man on a phone, and then sees a phone log with Stefon Diggs's number on it, at that same second, in that same location, there is nothing a defense attorney can do to unring that bell. That is what lawyers call a bulletproof timeline. And Chris just built one. And once a timeline like that is built, it does not get taken apart in cross-examination. It does not get discredited on the stand. It does not get spun in a press release. It sits there. It sits there for the entire trial. And it sits there in the memory of every juror who ever looks at it. That is why defense attorneys lose sleep the night before those exhibits get introduced, and that is why, somewhere in Los Angeles right now, a very expensive legal team is sitting around a very expensive conference table trying to figure out what they can possibly say to a jury to make a phone log look like anything other than what it is. Now let me step outside the courtroom for a second, because there is another elephant in this room, and her name is Cardi B. And before some of y'all get in the comments swinging, no, I am not here to pile on. I am here to tell you what actually happened, why it happened, and what it tells us about the desperation inside the Diggs camp right now. Because if you were watching yesterday, you already know that Cardi B lost her entire composure on Instagram and delivered one of the most spectacular cell phones in recent celebrity memory. She got on live, and out of her own mouth, she said the words. She said she is hip-hop's Britney Spears. She said she has the tea on all these celebrities, she knows who is sleeping with who, she knows who is doing what, she knows the whole dossier. She said nobody talks about them, because nobody cares, but everybody talks about her. And I sat there watching this monologue in real time and I could not decide whether to laugh or feel bad. Because Cardi B, sweetheart, comparing yourself to Britney Spears in the middle of a conservatorship conversation is not the flex you think it is. Britney Spears was legally stripped of her autonomy for over a decade. She could not spend her own money. She could not choose her own doctors. She could not decide whether or not to have another child. That is what happened to Britney Spears. That is not what is happening to you. What is happening to you is that you are the wife of a man accused of sexual assault and coordinated violence, and instead of sitting somewhere quiet with a legal advisor and a glass of water, you are jumping on live at midnight comparing yourself to a woman who was actually held hostage by her own family. Read the room. Read the room. Read the room. Because right now, at this exact moment, your husband is one filing away from criminal exposure, and your response to that reality is to compare yourself to a woman who spent 13 years of her life legally silenced. That is not a strategy. That is a cry for help wrapped in a designer bag. And if the people around you cared about you the way they claim to, one of them would have taken the phone out of your hand before you hit the live button. But here is the part that matters, because I do not throw stones just to hear the glass break. Cardi B did not get on that live because she was bored. Cardi B got on that live because Chris Blake Griffith's press run was working. It was working. And every day that it kept working, the narrative around her husband slid a little further out of her hands. So she did what she has always done. She grabbed the wheel. She said something loud. She tried to move the story. And what happened instead was the exact opposite. She amplified the very case she was trying to bury. Because now every entertainment site in America is running two headlines side by side. Cardi B has a meltdown. Stefon Diggs' accuser obtains phone records. And when those two headlines sit next to each other on the same page, on the same day, in the same news cycle, the average reader connects the dots without needing anyone to draw a line for them. That is not a coincidence. That is not bad luck. That is the sound of a narrative collapsing in real time. And the fascinating thing about narrative collapse in the social media era is that once it starts, it accelerates on its own. Every new headline feeds the next one. Every meltdown fuels the next round of coverage. Every attempt at damage control creates its own damage. That is the trap the Diggs camp has walked itself into, and there is no exit from that trap that does not involve either total silence or a courtroom verdict. And silence, at this point, is no longer an option. And let me tell you something else about Cardi B, because I have been watching this pattern for years and it never fails. Cardi B has built an entire brand on the idea that she is the messiest woman in the room, but that everybody else is the reason it is messy. She will pull up on a woman she has never met, tell that woman intimate details about her own marriage, question that man's sexuality on a public live stream in front of 1 million people, and then turn around 36 hours later and ask why the world will not leave her alone. That is not a coincidence either. That is a strategy. And it is a strategy that has always worked for her, because as long as she is the loudest voice in the story, she gets to decide what the story is about. But this time, the loudest voice is not hers. The loudest voice is a filing cabinet full of subpoenaed phone records. And phone records do not care about your Instagram followers. Somebody in the chat just said, so is Cardi going to get sued too? And I am going to be honest with you. I would not bet against it. Chris Blake Griffith already amended his complaint to add a defamation claim against Stefon Diggs based on a single social media post in which Stefon called Chris a thief. If Stefon can get sued for one post accusing Chris of stealing, then Cardi B, who has publicly and repeatedly called Chris a liar, a fraud, and worse, has painted a target on her own back the size of a billboard. She is not a random commenter. She is not a nobody with 60 followers. She is the wife of the defendant. She is a public figure with over 160 million people watching her every move. And under the eyes of the law, that kind of reach turns careless words into liability faster than most people understand. So no, I am not saying Chris is going to sue her. But I am saying that if he does, she handed him the ammunition, wrapped it in a bow, and dropped it at the front door of his lawyer's office. Free of charge. And I want to be clear, because I know somebody is going to clip this and pretend I said something I did not say. I am not celebrating the idea of Cardi B getting sued. I am not rooting for it. I am not throwing confetti at the possibility. What I am doing is telling you the honest legal reality of what happens when a public figure with 160 million followers uses that platform to publicly and repeatedly attack the credibility of a plaintiff in an active lawsuit against her own husband. That is not gossip. That is not commentary. That is exposure. And the law does not care how famous you are when the paperwork gets served. Now let us circle back to Stefon Diggs, because I want to talk about the defense his camp is trying to build, and I want to explain to you exactly why it is not going to hold water in a courtroom. Stefon Diggs recently posted a message on social media in which he seemingly addressed the entire lawsuit by writing, and I am paraphrasing here, that Chris was lying on him because he got caught stealing. That was the defense. That was the wall. Chris stole from me, therefore this whole story is fake. That is what the Diggs camp wants the public to believe. And on the surface, if you are just scrolling past on your phone, it almost sounds plausible. Almost. Until you actually stop and think about what the words mean. Here is my question, and I want you to answer it with me. If Chris Blake Griffith stole something from Stefon Diggs, why did Stefon Diggs never file a police report? Because I promise you, if a working-class stylist walks into the home of a multimillionaire athlete and walks out with a bag full of stolen goods, that athlete has both the resources and the incentive to call the police the second the door closes. That is not a controversial statement. That is basic human behavior. You call the police. You file the report. You get the paperwork. You lock in the timeline. But that never happened. There is no police report. There is no incident number. There is no filing. There is nothing on the record but a couple of videos on Stefon Diggs' own phone, shot at 4 in the morning, in a room full of grown men, where Chris Blake Griffith, allegedly drugged and outnumbered, is muttering, "I had no intention, I had no intention." And Stefon Diggs' people want the public to accept that as ironclad proof of theft. Let me tell you what a jury is going to see when those videos get played in court. A jury is going to see a young man surrounded by 3 or 4 larger men, at 4 in the morning, in an unfamiliar environment, saying whatever he had to say to get out of that room alive. A jury is not going to see a confession. A jury is going to see a coercion tape. And every prosecutor in America knows the difference. Because in the eyes of the law, a statement made under duress is not a statement. It is a survival response. And any first-year law student can pull that entire defense apart with a single cross-examination. Now, on top of all of that, remember what Chris Blake Griffith has said from day one. He said that after the alleged assault, Stefon Diggs' team stripped him down, took his phone, took his shoes, and pushed him out of the residence with nothing on his feet. Barefoot. In an unfamiliar city. In the middle of the night. And somehow, according to the Diggs camp, this same barefoot, shoeless, phoneless man is also the master thief who came to steal. Which is it? Because you cannot have both. You cannot tell the world that he left with nothing and also tell the world that he stole everything. Pick a story and stick with it. Because right now the Diggs camp is running 2 contradictory defenses at the same time, and hoping the public is too distracted to notice that they cancel each other out. He stole everything, but he left with nothing. He walked out barefoot, but he was carrying stolen goods. He was drugged and disoriented, but he was also a calculating thief. Every one of these framings is a separate story, and every one of them collapses the moment you place it next to the one right before it. That is not a defense. That is a panic. And panic is not a legal strategy. Because right now the story the Diggs camp is telling contradicts itself in the same paragraph, and any competent jury is going to notice. I want to zoom in on one more piece of the surveillance footage, because I think it is the single most important 60 seconds of visual evidence in this entire case, and I want you to sit with what it actually shows. In the footage, you can see Chris Blake Griffith walking through the lobby of his own apartment building. He glances up. He sees the men. You can see the moment his body registers what is about to happen. He pivots. He tries to get back on the elevator. One of the men gets an arm inside the elevator door before it can close. And from that moment forward, you are watching a full-grown human being get dragged and beaten in the hallway of a building that he pays rent to live in. There is a moment, and I want to warn you before you go watch it, where one of the men lifts his leg and kicks Chris Blake Griffith directly in the face. Not in the body. Not in the ribs. In the face. Like he was kicking a dog. And when I saw that clip for the first time, I sat in my chair and I did not move for about a minute. Because that is the kind of image that stays with you. That is the kind of image that no defense team is ever going to explain away. You want to talk about mental health? You want to talk about therapy? Chris Blake Griffith is now in individual therapy 3 times a week. He is in couples therapy trying to hold his relationship together while his partner watches the headline spiral. His children are watching their father go through the most public and humiliating experience of his life. And every single day, he has to wake up and read another blog post from another commentator who has decided that a working stylist with a busted face is somehow less believable than a Pro Bowl athlete with a publicist. That is what he is walking through. That is what the underdog fight actually looks like. It is not glamorous. It is not viral. It is not the kind of story that trends on Twitter for more than a day at a time. It is a slow, painful, grinding process of showing up every morning, doing the work, meeting with attorneys, sitting in therapy rooms, and holding a family together while the internet decides in real time whether or not to believe you. Most people would have folded by month 2. Most people would have taken a settlement. Most people would have signed a non-disclosure agreement and walked away with a check in their silence. Chris Blake Griffith did not do that. And every day he does not do that, his credibility grows just a little bit more. And when he sat in that TMZ chair in that baby blue shirt and calmly told the reporter that he was doing therapy 3 times a week, that was not weakness. That was a man showing his receipts on the human cost of what happened to him. And I want the internet to remember that image, because when this story ends, the receipts are going to belong to him. Now let us pivot to the Vlad interview, because this piece has been living in a quieter corner of the story, but it is about to get very loud. Chris Blake Griffith sat down with Vlad TV, and if you have followed Vlad for any length of time, you know that sitting down in that chair is a calculated risk. Vlad has a reputation, fair or unfair, for asking questions that occasionally box his guests into corners they cannot climb out of. I have watched people walk into that studio with a clean narrative and walk out with a legal problem. So when I heard that Chris Blake Griffith had agreed to sit down with Vlad, I said out loud, please, please, please keep it short, keep it clean, and do not answer anything your lawyer would not want on tape. And from the clips that have started to trickle out, it looks like he did exactly that. In one of the previewed clips, Chris alleges that another public figure, the boxer Gervonta Davis, is currently in debt to him for approximately $80,000. He also confirms that Gervonta Davis has a 7-fight deal with Amazon, which is a piece of information that is going to spark its own news cycle by tomorrow morning. But the most important thing about the Vlad interview is not any single claim. The most important thing is the tone. Because throughout that interview, Chris Blake Griffith carries himself with the same measured, deliberate, receipt-forward posture that he has carried through this entire ordeal. He does not shout. He does not scream. He does not curse Stefon Diggs. He does not curse Cardi B. He does what a plaintiff with a real case does. He states the facts. He lets the paperwork do the yelling. And every time he sits in front of another camera, that composure builds him a little more credibility with the audience that used to doubt him. You know what I have noticed? A month ago, if you scrolled through the comments section of any Chris Blake Griffith clip, you would see a 50-50 split between people who believed him and people who called him a liar. Today, that ratio has flipped so hard it is almost unrecognizable. Today, the comment sections are filled with people saying, I did not believe him at first, but the receipts keep landing on his side. I did not believe him at first, but why does Stefon keep responding on Twitter instead of in court? I did not believe him at first, but Cardi B just melted down on live for absolutely no reason. That is what a shifting public narrative looks like. That is the sound of a story turning. And that shift did not happen by accident. That shift happened because Chris Blake Griffith and his legal team have been playing chess while the Diggs camp has been flipping the checkerboard and hoping nobody notices. Somebody in the chat just asked, do I think criminal charges are coming? I am going to give you my honest assessment. If those phone records are what Chris says they are, and if the surveillance footage timeline matches, then it is not a question of whether criminal charges are coming. It is a question of when, and against how many people. Because coordinated attacks in the state of California carry serious statutory weight. Conspiracy is a separate charge from assault. And if the district attorney's office takes a look at the discovery Chris just entered into the civil docket, and they see what a civil legal team has been able to uncover with subpoenas and paperwork, they are going to want their own bite of that apple. That is how these things work. The civil case builds the framework. The prosecutors show up later and build the walls. And when they do, everybody whose name is on those phone records is going to have to answer for it. Now I know some of you are asking about Stefon Diggs's brother. I saw the comment. The surveillance footage does appear to show a man who has been identified in multiple places as Stefon's brother present at the scene. I am not going to name him tonight for legal reasons, and I would encourage everyone in the chat to do the same, because until charges are filed, the last thing anyone in this comment section needs is a defamation letter of their own. But I will say this. If that identification holds up, and if that individual's presence at the scene is confirmed by the evidence, then this case is not just about Stefon Diggs. It is about a family. It is about a network. And it is about the kind of coordination that turns a single lawsuit into a multi-defendant courtroom the size of a small stadium. And I want to say something to the young men watching this show, because I do not do these breakdowns just for entertainment. I do them because there are lessons in them. If you are ever in a situation, where you feel like somebody has wronged you, and your first instinct is to gather your people and go handle it in the street, I want you to stop. I want you to stop and think about the footprint you are about to leave behind. Because in the year we are living in, there are cameras on every corner, license plate readers on every highway, cell towers pinging your every move, and text messages sitting on servers in states you have never visited. There is no such thing as a private crime anymore. There is no such thing as a clean getaway. There is only the paper trail. And the paper trail always catches up. Always. 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 What Chris Blake Griffith allegedly experienced is the kind of thing that used to disappear into the shadows. It used to get buried under a pile of press releases and settlements. But we are not in that era anymore. We are in the era of receipts. And receipts do not blink. Let me also say a word about the audience that has kept this story alive, because none of this happens without you. When Chris Blake Griffith first came forward, the mainstream press barely blinked. It was a footnote. It was a paragraph. It was a headline buried on page 4 of an entertainment section. But the online community, the podcast hosts, the commentators, the independent creators, the everyday people posting screenshots and asking questions, they refused to let this story die. They kept it in the algorithm. They kept it in the conversation. And eventually the mainstream had no choice but to catch up. That is the power of the audience in 2026. That is why every celebrity with a secret should be looking over their shoulder tonight, because the wall between the powerful and the accountable is thinner than it has ever been in the history of media. And a working stylist with a busted face and a good lawyer just proved it. Now let me get back to the meat of tonight's update, because I want to close some of the loops I opened earlier. TMZ's article did an interesting thing that I want to point out. In the write-up, they covered the fact that Chris Blake Griffith wants to add a defamation claim to his lawsuit based on Stefon Diggs's recent social media post. But they did not go into detail about what specifically Chris plans to add regarding the phone records. That silence is not accidental. TMZ is doing what TMZ does. They are dripping the story. They give you a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, a little bit the next day, and every drip pulls another few million eyeballs back to the page. It is a business model. It is not journalism. And that means we are going to have to wait, probably another 24 to 48 hours, before we see the actual filed complaint hit the public record. When it does, I will be back here to walk you through every line of it, because I promise you, when the exact wording of that amended complaint hits, half the internet is going to lose its mind. In the meantime, keep your eyes on 3 things. Number 1, watch Stefon Diggs' social media. If he goes quiet, that means his lawyers finally put a gag order on his phone, which will tell you the defense team is officially in damage control. Number 2, watch Cardi B. If she disappears from the internet for more than 72 hours, that means somebody in her camp has finally taken away the phone, and that is when you will know how bad this really is behind closed doors. And number 3, watch the entertainment blogs. If you start seeing coordinated pieces suddenly framing Chris Blake Griffith as unreliable, or bringing up unrelated dirt from his past, that is not journalism. That is a public relations counteroffensive. And when you see it, you will know exactly why they are running it. Because the truth is starting to cost somebody something. I want to leave you tonight with a thought that has been sitting with me all day. Chris Blake Griffith has said, in multiple interviews, that the only thing he wants out of this case is his day in court. He has not asked for a dollar amount. He has not asked for a settlement. He has not asked for an apology. He has asked for a courtroom. And in a culture where everybody wants the check and nobody wants the fight, that alone should tell you something about the man. Because a man who wants a check will settle. A man who wants a check will disappear. A man who wants a check will drop the case the second the number gets high enough. But a man who wants the truth on the record, in front of a judge, in front of a jury, in front of the whole country, that is not a man who is running a scam. That is a man who has already survived the worst part of the story, and now he is coming for the ending. So if you have been on the fence about this case, if you have been half in and half out, if you have been waiting for the smoking gun before you picked a side, that gun just fired. The phone records are in evidence. The timeline is being built. The amended complaint is on its way. And every single day, another piece of what actually happened in that apartment building slides out from behind the curtain and into the daylight. This story is not slowing down. This story is accelerating. And by the time it hits a courtroom, it is not going to be a lawsuit anymore. It is going to be a reckoning. Before I let you go, I want to answer the comment that just came in that said, do you think Stefon Diggs' career survives this? And I am going to be honest with you. In today's NFL, in today's endorsement landscape, in today's brand-conscious media environment, an athlete accused of coordinating a violent attack on a witness is not an athlete anybody wants to put on a billboard. Sponsors will not touch that. Team ownership will not defend that. Even the most fan-first franchise in the league has a limit, and coordinated conspiracy is well past it. Now, do I think he loses his roster spot tomorrow? No. Wheels of justice move slow. But do I think that if these allegations are proven, his career as a marketable, endorsable, brand-ready superstar is over? Yes. And I do not say that lightly. I say that because I have watched too many careers end for less than what is currently sitting in the discovery folder on Chris Blake Griffith's attorney's desk. The paperwork always outlives the highlight reel. Always. And to the folks who keep asking why I stay up in the middle of the night to break down stories like this one, the answer is simple. Because when the sun comes up tomorrow morning, the machine is going to try to reframe this. The publicists are going to start making calls. The friendly reporters are going to start writing softer angles. The comment sections are going to get flooded with fresh talking points that all sound suspiciously similar to each other. And by the time you finish your morning coffee, half of what we said tonight is going to be scrubbed, softened, or spun. So while the machine is still asleep, I wanted to get the truth on record. I wanted you to hear it clean, uncut, and unbothered. And I wanted you to be able to say, when the reframe hits, no, I heard it the first time, and I know what was said. That is why we are here. That is why we do this. And that is why, when the next chapter drops, and it is coming soon, I want every single one of you back in this room. Because the story you are hearing tonight is the story before it gets sanitized. And once it gets sanitized, most people will never hear the original version again. That is what a machine does. A machine does not lie in a single sentence. A machine lies by softening the edges of 10 sentences at once until the shape of the truth becomes something the public can no longer recognize. So do me a favor. Drop a comment before you leave. Tell me who you believe. Tell me what you think happens next. Tell me whether you think Cardi B is going to keep going live at midnight, or whether her team is finally going to lock her out of her own account. Tell me whether you think Stefon Diggs is going to sit for a deposition, or whether he is going to plead the fifth so many times that the jury draws its own conclusions. Tell me whether you think criminal charges are coming, and if so, against how many people. Because I read every one of these comments before I go to bed, and the conversation you build in that section is what fuels the next episode. And speaking of the next episode, we are going to be back in a few hours with a deep dive into Cardi B's Britney Spears meltdown, a full breakdown of the Vlad interview once the rest of it drops, and a segment on Gervonta Davis that is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. So do not touch that subscribe button, do not touch that notification bell, do not touch anything except that comment box, because we are just getting started. And if you are new to this room, if this is your first night watching, welcome. You picked a hell of a night to walk in. Because in the next 72 hours, this story is going to break wide open in ways that even I cannot fully predict, and I want you here for every single beat of it. This has been a late night receipt drop, and the door swings both ways. Until next time, stay awake, stay watching, and never, ever underestimate what a working man with a good lawyer can do when the paperwork finally lands in his hands. Good night.